My friends, after my initial reaction to the Napoleon movie trailer, let's just say that I was already worried. But after watching the movie, it was worse than I expected. Much worse. A complete shipwreck.
Are you not entertained?
No.
Even if we disregard the fact that they took a big dump on historical accuracy, the story itself has no pacing, and truthfully, it's not that interesting. Personally, I felt uncomfortable throughout the movie. Believe it or not, movie director Ridley Scott actually managed to turn Napoleon into a pathetic, emotional little weakling that always cries for Josephine. I expected an epic, badass retelling of Napoleon's story, even if it wasn't 100% historically accurate. But in the end, I just feel the Ridley Scott of The Duelists, Black Hawk Down, Gladiator, and Kingdom of Heaven is gone. Just like this article explained, Ridley Scott delivered a film that works better as a comedy than a historical epic. Ridley, what have you done?
You were the chosen one!
The critics are right. The movie felt like a parody of Napoleon. They even got heavily inspired, for legal purposes, by a funny scene from the movie The Death of Stalin, when they arrest all the leaders. Or when Napoleon throws a fuss at the British and says, "Oh, you think you're better because you have boats."
And I thought my jokes were bad.
Never let the Brits cover French history. No. One thing you know I pay a lot of attention to is battle scenes. I'll give you my personal rating of each one of these historical battles in a moment. Uh-oh, whoops, it's blurred. But here are my main critics. Most of the battles either take place at night or have this very dark filter and you don't see anything of what's actually happening. Tactics, maneuvering, firing by ranks? Nah. The battles consist of two groups simply crashing into each other like in a massive mosh pit. Exactly what you see in Viking movies. Why even carry a musket when all you're gonna do is punch each other and wrestle? You can't even see proper units marching in formation. It's always a huge swarm of troops. But the worst is when we see World War I trench tactics being employed in battles such as Austerlitz and Waterloo, which ended up being like a combination of Vikings and 1917. They couldn't even manage to make cannonballs actually bounce on the ground. It's just explosions everywhere. I mean, even Mel Gibson's The Patriot could get that right. Oh yeah, and if I can let loose, battlefields during that era spread across kilometers. It's just laughable to see Napoleon constantly make use of hand motions and flags to send orders to his army, when we know he would write down orders as clearly as possible and send them out with a complex system of messengers on horse going back and forth. And like Ridley Scott poetically told his critics, "Get a life!" No bro, no bro, you can't say that on a $200 million budget. I'm critical because I know his team could have achieved better results. How come movies from 20, 50, 70 years ago did it better? Oh yeah, I think it's also a good moment to announce that I'm working on a war movie as historical consultant. It's going to be World War I themed, and the movie director is doing a great job to get everything in motion with the budget we have available. But that's all I can announce for now. So I fully understand the balance to keep between historical realism and entertainment. Okay, apart from the rant, going into the movie, my first worry was the huge time frame to be covered. And indeed, it proved to be a problem. You start during the French Revolution, and you end with the Battle of Waterloo. How can you possibly tell over 20 years of Napoleon's life in just 2 hours and a half? My friends, it was doomed from the start. When you want to make such a movie, you either have to focus on one part of his life, or you have to release a mini-series, like the 4 episodes of the 2002 Napoleon series, whose main problem was a very small budget. The 2 hours and a half screen time of the movie would necessarily lead to massive chronological jumps. Napoleon is fighting the royalists in France, and the moment after, he's in Egypt. Why? Don't know. In one scene, Napoleon leads a coup against the revolutionary government, and the next, he's crowned emperor. One moment, Napoleon fights the 1805 Battle of Austerlitz, and then he cuts to the 1807 Peace Treaty of Tilsit, completely skipping over Napoleon's invasion of Prussia. But I can forgive all that if it wasn't for that one mistake. The worst jump in time, for me, was when we see Napoleon's disastrous retreat from Russia, which is already rushed. And a moment after, Napoleon is abdicating. In reality, there were 2 years between his campaign in Russia and his abdication. 2 of the most important years, at least 20 battles and major geopolitical shifts. This time jump means we skip the part where all of Europe turns against Napoleon and his dream of a long-lasting empire. Not only did his army get shattered in Russia, but he's now facing a vengeful coalition of Russians, Prussians, and Austrians. Even his former German allies like Bavaria, Hanover, and Württemberg have switched sides. Even worse, his former generals like Bernadotte, now king of Sweden, and Murat, king of Naples, have joined the coalition and turned their kingdoms against the emperor. I mean, just covering this part of his life would have been so dramatic and epic, with Napoleon's facing all these betrayals. Removing these 2 crucial years also means skipping through the turning point of the Battle of Leipzig in 1813. One of the biggest battles ever fought in Europe, with 500,000 men involved, and the first major battle where Napoleon was defeated fair and square. I think this would have been very interesting for the movie to cover, because the main reason behind this defeat is that his enemies learned Napoleon's art of war and applied it against him. And it worked! It also means skipping through the day Russian Tsar Alexander I led his troops in a triumphant march to the streets of Paris in late March 1814. And I think from a dramatic perspective, it would have presented a lot of contrast and a pretty interesting revenge story arc compared to Napoleon marching into Moscow. In my opinion, part of it was done on purpose by Ridley Scott to push the British at the forefront of the Napoleonic story, with them fighting at Toulon and at Waterloo, when truth be told, during these 20 years of war they played a largely secondary role, at least from a military perspective. Even then, during the siege of Toulon, only a third of the Allied troops were British. Same thing during the Waterloo campaign. At least the movie brings up the importance of those Prussian reinforcements to Wellington, who just exhaled, "Thank God," the moment they intervene on the flanks. But again, the way the battle was portrayed feels like a parody. Honestly, all the battles pretty much feel like medieval battles with cannons. The second most obvious problem is that Joaquin Phoenix was not fit for the role of Napoleon. And it was a fear I already brought up during my reaction to the trailer. With all due respect, he's way too old. And because of that, we don't even feel the 20-year transition from young Bonaparte to Emperor Napoleon. During the siege of Toulon, Napoleon Bonaparte was a young, fit, and energetic 24-year-old. Very far from the old, cynical, and sick 45-year-old at Waterloo. Although Joaquin Phoenix is a great actor, throughout the movie he has zero charisma. Mojo gone. There's not a point in the movie where we understand how thousands, hundreds of thousands of men would follow this man into battle and into the slaughter. With Ridley Scott instead of Napoleon, the god of war, the tactical mastermind of his time, the one that turned the French army into an unstoppable tempest. We get a Napoleon that's shy, mumbling all the time, and that looks borderline mentally unstable. The guy is soft and literally sleeps through battles. Did you know that Napoleon charged the British squares at Waterloo, and that the British used snipers with scopes to try to shoot him?
Yeah, baby!
IRL, Napoleon won over 60 major battles and adapted his strategy to all possible environments, from snow, mud, desert, rain, mountains, and he crushed all possible adversaries. His mere presence on the battlefield would boost the morale of all the troops. All Europe had to combine its forces to shut him down. I'm also not going to get over the fact that they turned Napoleon into some sort of Assassin's Creed character. We literally see him disguised in stealth mode, scouting enemy positions up close on his own. Instead of this nonsense, why not depict Napoleon in his headquarters, looking over maps, planning his next moves with his generals, which by the way are completely absent from the story. Talking about Napoleon without his generals is like, going on a road trip without your best friends. As a matter of fact, Napoleon doesn't even feel like the main protagonist of his own movie. The movie should have been called Josephine. Now that's a very accurate title. She's the focal point of the story. She's the reason everything happens. Napoleon left Egypt because of Josephine. He returned from exile because of Josephine. And he lost at Waterloo, you guessed it, because of Josephine. Yes, Josephine had a place in Napoleon's heart. Napoleon's last words were, France, Army Commander Josephine. But it wasn't Josephine, France Army Commander. Josephine came last. Josephine came after warfare, because in the end she represented his little touch of femininity in a world of cold brutality and death. For example, in the movie, Napoleon departed Egypt when he learned of Josephine's infidelity. In reality, yes, he did get mad, but then he stole one of his officers' wives, Pauline, and yeah. He certainly wasn't the little prude portrayed in the movie. Just look up the number of affairs he had and all the kids he fathered. What the movie ignores is that Napoleon left Egypt for very precise reasons. From a military perspective, the British Navy destroyed the French Revolutionary Fleet at Aboukir. The French army was now stranded in the Middle East and cut off from supplies, all the while getting pressured on all fronts. From a political perspective, France was getting defeated on the battlefields of Europe, and this led to massive political instability in the country. Napoleon saw an opening and a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to rise to the top, at the cost of all his men he left behind in Egypt. The movie could have shown that Napoleon's ambitions often came at the cost of a lot of his followers. Another such lost opportunity was to talk about Josephine's son, Eugène de Beauharnais, who actually became one of Napoleon's best generals. As a commanding officer, he won many battles. But because of what happened between Josephine, his mom, and Napoleon, his stepfather, he simply retired from military life and refused to follow Napoleon into the Battle of Waterloo. Sadly, in the movie, we only see him as a child and he's pretty much gone after that. Yes, I know I'm very critical and it can be heavy. But just take a look at all the other movie directors that achieved better results. I want to remind people there's only two ways to make Musket-era war movies realistic. When you have a limited budget, you can't depict the entire battle, or it will look super lame. If you don't have enough extras, don't use wide angles. It's as ridiculous as trying to portray a concert and you have 50 people in the crowd. It just looks dull. And that's the mistake Ridley Scott has done. Another option would have been like Stanley Kubrick did in Barry Lyndon. You need to reduce the scope of the battle and only show a small part of the fighting. For example, during this attack of the British line infantry, it's clearly said that this battle was a small skirmish, never recorded in history books, but that it remained nonetheless impressive for its participants. Or when the main character Barry joins the Prussian army. Once again, we're not told the name of any historical battle. We just see fighting going on in some random village. With great skill, Stanley Kubrick managed to depict the battle with roughly 40 extras playing the Prussians and 100 to 200 men in French uniforms. We have to highlight Stanley Kubrick's creative genius when it comes to recreating battle scenes. There are other movies with pretty nice battle scenes, like the charge of the French cuirassiers during the Battle of Eylau in the movie Colonel Chabert. Once again, which depicts only one specific part of the battle, but with great detail. The second way is the Soviet method and have 15 to 20,000 extras available in movies like War and Peace and Waterloo. Soviet movie director Sergei Bondarchuk managed to recreate real-life size battles. And then you have perhaps the most epic, badass historical movies ever made. And despite the thousands of extras, it's the attention to details that just plunges the audience into the movie. Sure, you can replace it with CGI, but like Zachary brilliantly said, the CGI animators will never be able to grasp the glory, splendor, and deep horrors of these battles. They lack the knowledge and the vision. Facts, yes. When you have actual humans doing the maneuvers, it feels more natural. The way the lines advance is not perfect. They wobble around terrain features. There are gaps with some troops falling behind. At this point, I'm trying to think of what the movie had good. I mean, the uniforms looked cool. Next. But something else that got me disappointed is how Ridley Scott decided to portray Napoleon like some sort of butcher. Although the idea is not wrong, it's the way he did it that bothered me. He just showed the death toll of some of his major battles. It's lame, flaccid, zero emotions. Even the Lord of the Rings managed to depict the brutality of war much better. What should have been done is simply depict the aftermath of one battle, like Borodino during the campaign of Russia, or even Eylau, where we would see Napoleon walk through the snowy fields, whose color has been altered by 15,000 soldiers KIA, entire regiments gone, and another 40,000 wounded seeking for help. After this battle of Eylau, Napoleon actually said, "What a massacre and without result." Even if you don't know anything about Napoleon's story, this visual experience would clearly send a message. Okay, now comes the time for my rating of the battle scenes. So the 2023 Napoleon movie showcased 6 major battles. The Siege of Toulon, the suppression of the Royalist revolt, the Pyramids, Austerlitz, Borodino, and Waterloo. And what's sad is that most of the battle scenes are almost fully portrayed in the trailer. Maybe the movie has another 5 minutes of actual combat, but that's pretty much it. So here we go, 5 on 10 is passing grade. The Siege of Toulon. Overall, the French army did storm a fort. One of such attempts did take place at night, and the conquest of this position did allow the French artillery to come within range of British ships. Napoleon did lose his horse under him, and then he joined the battle. Not bad, not bad. The main problem is that we actually see grenadiers bother trying to place explosives at the bottom of the wall. Then the wall explodes and there is a massive breach. But unlike what was historically done with the French troops going into that breach, Napoleon and his men use ladders to go up the fort. I mean, it's so inconvenient. Even the orcs in the Lord of the Rings had better tactical skills. They ditched the ladders and simply rushed into the breach. Nonetheless, I rate the Siege of Toulon 7 out of 10. The Royalist revolt, 13 Vendémiaire. Yes, Napoleon did use his cannons against the crowd, with canister shot at close range. However, if I'm being picky, the streets of Paris at the time were much more narrow, and the tight layout of the city made canister shots even more deadly. And like I said in the trailer, the rebels were most likely armed. But overall, we get the point, 7 out of 10. Buckle up, because from this moment on, it goes downhill. The Battle of the Pyramids. No. We're not even told why Napoleon went to Egypt in the first place. So this battle is meaningless. The only shock factor is that the French cannons are firing straight at the pyramids, which never happened. And the actual battle took place 17 kilometers away from the pyramids. We don't even see the famous charge of the Mamluks against the French squares. Nah, this one doesn't go. 2 out of 10. I think this part should have been removed from the movie altogether. Austerlitz, 1805. It was one of the biggest battles of the movie. Indeed, it took place in December. There was indeed some sort of fog and snow. And there were French, Austrians, and Russians fighting. And there was a lake. That's as far as we can go for historical accuracy. Apart from that, it's all made up. Fighting is taking place over a silly camp, like a video game. The Austro-Prussians were actually on the hill, the plateau of Pratzen, and they marched downhill towards the French lines. French artillery is not even deployed as part of an actual battery. Even the BBC version of War and Peace did it better. So my rating for this battle, 4 out of 10. The Battle of Borodino. This one is simple. It simply showcases a giant mosh pit of cavalry and infantry just charging into each other. And of course, Napoleon on his horse charging the enemy. Nah. Not only is it not historically accurate at all, he was actually known as a very bad horse rider. Napoleon never charged the enemy ever. But even if we disregard historical accuracy, the scene is not epic at all. Why is it even in the movie? 1 out of 10. The Battle of Waterloo. Once again, the movie spends a good amount of time on this final battle. So yeah, they portray the rain before the battle, the French cavalry charging the British squares, and the Prussians arriving on Napoleon's flank. By the way, they arrive on the wrong flank. In the movie, they arrive on the left flank. In reality, they arrived on the right flank. But I think this was the least of the concerns of Ridley Scott. And what the movie doesn't show at all is that Napoleon actually thought that these incoming reinforcements were French, and that this highly impacted the way he led the battle. Apart from that, the battlefield of Waterloo is simply depicted as a field. The farms of Hougoumont, La Haye-Sainte are not shown, the villages of Papelotte and Plancenoit are missing, and the hill from which the Allied troops hid from French artillery is not even there. But at least they had trenches to protect from the French bombardment. There were even snipers trying to shoot down Napoleon when he charged the squares. The cavalry attacks, once again, there were not enough extras because the cavalry attacks consist of one line of 20 guys. And that's my problem with making wide-angle shots, when you clearly don't have enough people on the ground. In the end, the way Ridley Scott portrayed this battle seems like an amateur reenactment turned into some medieval warfare. So I give it a 3 out of 10. So here's the final rating of all the battle scenes. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description below.